Alexander the Great, 356 to 323 BC. When we speak of conquerors, one name rises above nearly all others. A young man, not yet 30, who redrew the map of the known world, shattered empires, and carved a legend so powerful that centuries later, kings, generals, and even emperors would whisper his name as the measure of greatness. His name was Alexander of Macedon, but history would remember him with a title few have ever truly earned: Alexander the Great. Alexander was born in 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedon, a rugged kingdom on the northern edge of Greece. His father, King Philip II, was a warrior statesman who transformed Macedon into a military powerhouse. His mother, Olympias, was fierce, ambitious, and deeply spiritual, filling young Alexander's mind with stories of gods, omens, and destiny. Legend says that on the night of his birth, the Temple of Artemis, one of the wonders of the ancient world, burned to the ground. Some claimed it was no coincidence, a sign that a force had entered the world so mighty, even the gods trembled. From an early age, Alexander was told he was not just mortal. His mother insisted he was descended from Achilles, the hero of Troy, and his father claimed bloodline from Heracles himself. Alexander believed it, and that belief, that sense of destiny, became the fuel of his ambition. But destiny alone is nothing without education. And for that, Philip secured one of the greatest teachers in history, Aristotle. The philosopher taught young Alexander not only philosophy and politics, but geography, science, and literature. Most importantly, he instilled in him the works of Homer, the tales of the Iliad, where Achilles stood as the ideal warrior. Alexander carried a copy of the Iliad on every campaign, sleeping with it under his pillow. He did not merely want to be a king, he wanted to be a hero, a new Achilles. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, Alexander was just 20 years old. In most kingdoms, such a young successor would be crushed by rivals, usurpers, or foreign threats. But Alexander acted with a speed and decisiveness that stunned everyone. He eliminated threats at home, suppressing revolts among the Macedonian nobility. Then he turned outward. Greece, which Philip had united under Macedonian dominance, saw the young king as weak. Cities like Thebes and Athens began murmuring about rebellion. Alexander marched south with fire in his eyes. At Thebes, when the city dared defy him, he unleashed such brutal retribution that it became a warning to all of Greece. Thebes was utterly destroyed, its walls torn down, its citizens slaughtered or enslaved. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared. The message was clear: challenge Alexander, and you will vanish from history. No one doubted him again. The Greeks submitted, and Alexander was confirmed as hegemon of the Hellenic League. He inherited his father's plan, a grand invasion of the Persian Empire, the greatest superpower of the ancient world. In 334 BC, Alexander set out with an army of around 40,000 men, a fraction of Persia's power, but disciplined, loyal, and led by a commander who believed he was destined to rule the world. At the Battle of Granicus, on the banks of a river in Asia Minor, Alexander's cavalry charged directly into the Persian satrap's forces. He was almost killed. A Persian noble raised his sword over him, but was cut down by one of Alexander's companions at the last instant. It was the first of many close calls, proof that Alexander was no distant commander. He led from the front, always visible, always risking his life beside his men. From there, the campaign became a storm. Cities fell, Persian garrisons surrendered, and Alexander was greeted as a liberator by Greek cities under Persian control. But Persia itself would not fall so easily. Its ruler, Darius III, gathered immense armies to crush the upstart Macedonian. The first great test came at Issus, where Alexander faced Darius directly. The Persian army dwarfed his, perhaps 100,000 strong against his 40,000. But Alexander was a master of maneuver. He led his companion cavalry in a thunderous charge, cutting through the Persian center straight toward Darius. The sight of Alexander, spear raised, eyes locked on him, broke the great king's nerve. Darius fled the battlefield in his chariot, leaving behind his mother, wife, and children, who all fell into Alexander's hands. Instead of killing them, Alexander treated them with respect, even honor. To Darius's mother, he gave the dignity of a queen. To his wife, he promised no violation. It was not just mercy, it was propaganda. Alexander was not a barbarian invader. He was a rightful king, a ruler of rulers. By 332 BC, Alexander had pushed south into Egypt, where Persian rule was hated. The Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator, crowning him pharaoh. At the oasis of Siwa, he visited the oracle of Amun, where priests hailed him as the son of Zeus, Ammon. To Alexander, this was confirmation of what his mother had always told him: he was divine. A god among men, he founded a city at the mouth of the Nile, Alexandria. It would become one of the greatest centers of learning and trade in the world, a jewel of his empire, and a symbol of how deeply his conquests reshaped civilization. The decisive moment came at Gaugamela, in modern Iraq. Darius assembled perhaps 250,000 men, infantry, cavalry, scythe chariots, even war elephants. Alexander had around 47,000. Outnumbered 5-1, he should have been crushed. Instead, he delivered one of the most brilliant tactical victories in military history. He feigned weakness on his right flank, drawing the Persian cavalry out of position. Then, in a flash, he led his companion cavalry straight through the gap, driving at Darius once more. The great king fled again. His army collapsed into chaos. Persia, the empire of Cyrus and Xerxes, the eternal enemy of Greece, was finished. Alexander marched into Babylon, Susa, Persepolis. He burned the palaces of Persepolis in a drunken celebration of vengeance for the Persian sack of Athens a century and a half earlier. The wealth of Persia, hoarded for generations, now flowed into Macedonian hands. But Alexander was not satisfied. He pushed eastward, deeper into lands no Greek had ever dreamed of conquering. Through deserts, mountains, and jungles, his army followed. In Bactria and Sogdianus, modern Afghanistan and Central Asia, he faced brutal resistance. He married Roxana, a local noblewoman, to unite his new territories. He founded dozens of Alexandrias, planting Greek culture across Asia. Finally, he reached India. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, 326 BC, he faced King Porus, who commanded elephants towering over the battlefield. The river was swollen, the terrain treacherous. But Alexander outflanked Porus, attacking with discipline and coordination. Despite the terror of the elephants, his troops prevailed. Impressed by Porus's bravery, Alexander did not depose him. Instead, he reinstated him as king under Macedonian rule, saying, "Treat him as a king ought to be treated." In 323 BC, at just 32 years old, Alexander fell ill in Babylon. Fever gripped him, and after days of agony, he could no longer speak. When asked to whom he left his empire, he whispered, "To the strongest." With those words, he died, leaving behind the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Greece to Egypt, from Persia to India. His generals, the Diadochi, tore it apart in endless wars. But his legend endured. Alexander's conquests spread Greek culture across the known world, creating the Hellenistic Age. Cities flourished, ideas mingled, sciences advanced. Greek became the language of trade, philosophy, and governance from the Mediterranean to the Indus. But beyond politics and culture, Alexander left something more elusive: inspiration. He was the conqueror every conqueror envied. Caesar wept before his statue, lamenting that he had achieved so little in comparison. Napoleon modeled campaigns on his. Even centuries later, his name still carries a weight few in history can rival. Alexander lived only 32 years. But in that short span, he did not just conquer empires. He conquered time itself, carving his name into eternity. Julius Caesar, 100 to 44 BC. If Alexander was the blazing comet who conquered the East, Julius Caesar was the statesman, general who transformed Rome itself. He was not just a conqueror of lands. He was a conqueror of the Roman Republic. A man who turned politics, war, and ambition into weapons sharper than any sword. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC into the Julian clan, a patrician family claiming descent from Venus herself. But despite noble blood, his family was not wealthy. In his youth, Rome was a republic plagued by corruption, class tensions, and civil wars. Caesar was a young man in dangerous times. He was captured by pirates once, and when they demanded ransom, he joked that they were asking too little, that he was worth more. After his release, he returned with ships, captured those same pirates, and had them crucified. From the beginning, Caesar was fearless, bold, a man who believed he was destined for greatness. In 58 BC, Caesar was appointed governor of Gaul, a vast region encompassing modern France, Belgium, and beyond. What followed was one of the most brilliant campaigns in military history, the Gallic Wars. For nearly a decade, Caesar fought tribe after tribe, turning a fractured land into Roman territory. Helvetii migration, 58 BC, he blocked and defeated an entire migrating people. Battle against the Belgas, 57 BC, he crushed a coalition of northern tribes. Invasions of Britain, 55-54 BC, he became the first Roman to cross into the mysterious island. But his greatest triumph came at Alesia, 52 BC. There, Caesar faced the Gallic leader Vercingetorix, who united tribes in rebellion. Atop a fortified hill town, Vercingetorix seemed invincible. Caesar responded with genius. He built double walls, one facing in to besiege the Gauls, one facing out to hold off relief forces. When a massive Gallic army arrived to break the siege, Caesar's men fought on two fronts, trapped between walls, outnumbered, demmed, desperate. But discipline, engineering, and Caesar's leadership triumphed. The relief army was crushed. Vercingetorix surrendered, casting his weapons at Caesar's feet. With that, Gaul was Rome's. Caesar had conquered an entire region, securing immense wealth, prestige, and an army utterly loyal to him personally. But back in Rome, Caesar's enemies feared him. Senators like Pompey and Cato saw his ambition as a threat to the Republic. They ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew what that meant: exile, trial, or death. Instead, in 49 BC, he made a choice that changed history. He crossed the small river Rubicon with his legions, declaring, "The die is cast." To march an army into Italy was treason. But Caesar did it anyway. Civil war erupted. Caesar faced Pompey, once his ally in the first triumvirate. Pompey commanded Rome's official armies, supported by the Senate. Yet Caesar, with his veterans from Gaul, moved swiftly. He seized Italy without resistance, pursued Pompey to Greece. At Pharsalus, 48 BC, outnumbered 2-1, he crushed Pompey's forces. Pompey fled to Egypt, seeking refuge, but was murdered on arrival. Caesar followed, only to be drawn into the intrigues of the Egyptian court. There he met Cleopatra, the young queen, and began one of history's most famous liaisons. Caesar restored her to the throne, securing Egypt as an ally and fathering a son with her, Caesarion. But his wars were not yet over. He defeated remaining Republican forces in Africa at Thapsus and in Spain at Munda. By 45 BC, Caesar was the undisputed master of Rome. Victorious, Caesar returned to Rome not as a general, but as a ruler. The Senate named him Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, a system still reflected in today's dates. He expanded citizenship, planned massive building projects, and centralized power. But his dominance alarmed many. To old Republicans, Caesar looked less like a savior and more like a king, and Rome had sworn never to have kings again. On March 15, 44 BC, Caesar entered the Senate, unaware that dozens of senators had conspired against him. Among them was Brutus, a man he considered almost a son. They surrounded him, daggers flashing. Struck again and again, Caesar fell at the base of Pompey's statue. According to legend, his last words were, "Eat too, Brute. You too, Brutus." With his death, Rome was plunged into another civil war. But Caesar's legacy could not be killed. Caesar was more than a conqueror. He was a revolutionary force. He expanded Rome's borders and secured Gaul for centuries. He reshaped Roman politics, ending the Republic and laying the foundations for the empire. His very name, Caesar, became a title. In German, it became Kaiser. In Russian, Tsar. No conqueror after him, from Charlemagne to Napoleon, could escape his shadow. He was a general, a dictator, a reformer, and a visionary. But above all, Julius Caesar was the man who dared to gamble everything against impossible odds, and won. Genghis Khan c. 1162 to 1227. Long before he became the most feared conqueror in history, he was a boy named Temujin, born on the windswept steppes of Mongolia around 1162. His father was poisoned by rivals, and young Temujin was left an outcast, his family abandoned by their tribe, hunted, starving, and betrayed. He grew up in a world where loyalty was rare and survival meant ruthlessness. He killed his half-brother in a quarrel over food. He was captured by enemies and escaped by sheer will. Every hardship forged him into steel. By the time he was a young man, Temujin had one guiding vision: unite the tribes of the steppe, a land of endless feuds, shifting alliances, and betrayals. And against all odds, he did. Step by step, Temujin proved himself. He built a reputation for rewarding loyalty, punishing betrayal, and promoting men by merit rather than noble birth. Through alliances, victories, and brutal crackdowns, he united Mongol clans under his banner. In 1206, at a great council, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler. It was more than a title. It was a destiny. From that moment, the Mongol tribes were no longer squabbling nomads. They were a single nation, and Genghis Khan aimed them at the world. The Mongol army was unlike anything seen before. Horse archers, every warrior carried powerful composite bows, firing arrows with deadly accuracy even at full gallop. Mobility. Each rider had multiple horses, switching mounts to travel incredible distances without tiring. Discipline orders were absolute. Disobedience meant death, but loyalty meant reward. Organization. The army was divided into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. A system that created efficiency and cohesion. They could cover 100 miles in a single day. They struck like lightning, vanishing before enemies could respond. To face the Mongols was to face the embodiment of speed, discipline, and terror. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a caravan of merchants to the Khwarezm Empire, a wealthy state in Central Asia. The Shah of Khwarezm betrayed him. The caravan was seized, the merchants executed. Genghis responded not with words, but with fire. He unleashed his armies across the empire, city after city falling under his wrath. Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench, jewels of Islamic civilization, were stormed and sacked. Entire populations were slaughtered or enslaved. When Bukhara fell, Genghis entered the city's mosque, climbed its pulpit, and declared, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The world trembled. Even before Khwarezm, Genghis had tested his might against the great empires of China. Against the Jin dynasty of northern China, he proved his brilliance in siege warfare, adapting Chinese engineers to Mongol tactics. Cities that once seemed unassailable fell to his armies. He broke the Tangut of Western Xia and forced them into submission. Later, his descendants would complete the conquest of the Song, but it was Genghis who laid the foundation, piercing the myth that China's walls could hold back the steppe. His armies rode west, pushing deep into the Caucasus and even touching the frontiers of Eastern Europe. In 1223, at the Battle of the Kalka River, Mongol forces annihilated a coalition of Russian princes and steppe allies. For Europe, it was a warning of storms to come. For Genghis, it was proof that no horizon was too distant. But Genghis was not only a destroyer, he was also a lawgiver. He established the Yasa, a legal code that bound his empire. Religious tolerance was enforced. Trade routes were protected. Diplomats and merchants were granted safety. The empire operated like a vast machine, where even conquered peoples found order under Mongol rule. Silk Road trade flourished under his dominion. From China to the Mediterranean, goods, ideas, and technologies traveled under the protection of Mongol banners. In 1227, during a campaign against the Western Xia, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause remains a mystery. Some say he fell from his horse, others claim wounds or illness. His body was returned to Mongolia, buried in an unmarked grave, its location unknown to this day. Legend says rivers were diverted, forests trampled, and those who buried him killed to keep the secret. Genghis Khan's empire, at his death, stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, but his descendants carried it further, creating the largest contiguous land empire in human history. His legacy was vast. He destroyed kingdoms, but also created order across continents. He brought terror but also fostered trade, communication, and cultural exchange. He reshaped Eurasia so profoundly that even today, 1 in 200 men are estimated to descend from his bloodline. To his enemies, he was a demon, a scourge. To his people, he was a lawgiver, a unifier, a father of the nation. To history, he remains the conqueror above all others. What made him so extraordinary was not just the scale of his empire, but the speed and ruthlessness with which he built it. In a single lifetime, he turned scattered tribes into the most unstoppable military force the world had ever seen. His empire was forged in blood, but it also built bridges across lands, cultures, and centuries. He was not just a man of war. He was the architect of a new world order. And when history whispers the names of conquerors, Genghis Khan is spoken with awe, fear, and reluctant respect. Hannibal Barca, 247 to 183 BC. Hannibal's story begins not on the battlefield, but as a boy. Born in Carthage, the powerful North African state, he was the son of Hamilcar Barca, the great general of the First Punic War against Rome. When Hannibal was just 9, his father brought him to the temple of Baal and made him swear an oath: never be a friend to Rome. That oath would define his life. By the time Hannibal took command of Carthage's armies in Spain, Rome and Carthage were once again locked in rivalry. Rome was expanding across the Mediterranean, and Carthage was fighting to hold its empire. Hannibal decided not to wait for Rome to strike. He launched an audacious plan: carry the war into Italy itself. It was a feat so daring it became legend. In 218 BC, Hannibal set out with around 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. His route: over the towering, snowbound Alps, terrain no army had ever attempted. The journey was brutal. Avalanches, rock slides, freezing cold, and constant ambushes from mountain tribes cut his army to pieces. By the time Hannibal descended into Italy, half his force was gone. But what remained was hardened, battle ready, and led by a man the Romans would soon call their greatest nightmare. Hannibal wasted no time proving his genius. He defeated the Romans at the Trebia River, 218 BC, then at Lake Trasimene, 217 BC, where he set an ambush that annihilated an entire Roman army. But his masterpiece came in 216 BC at Cannae. Rome sent 80,000 men against Hannibal's 50,000. Hannibal used a brilliant maneuver. Placing his weakest troops in the center, he lured the Romans forward. Then his cavalry smashed Rome's flanks, and his veterans closed from behind. The result? The greatest Roman defeat in history. Nearly 50,000 Romans were killed in a single day. Cannae became the textbook example of the double envelopment maneuver, still studied by military academies today. After Cannae, much of southern Italy defected to Hannibal. Cities like Capua joined him. Macedon allied with him. Rome seemed on the brink of collapse. But Rome refused to surrender. Instead, it adopted a new strategy: avoid Hannibal in open battle, wear him down, and strike elsewhere. For years, Hannibal roamed Italy undefeated, but unable to break Rome's iron will. While Hannibal raged through Italy, Rome struck Carthage's empire abroad. Scipio Africanus, a rising Roman general, campaigned in Spain and then carried the war to North Africa itself. At last, Hannibal was recalled to defend his homeland. In 202 BC, Hannibal faced Scipio at Zama, near Carthage. It was the duel of two geniuses. Hannibal's elephants charged, but Scipio had trained his men to open lanes and let them pass harmlessly. Roman cavalry, superior this time, routed Hannibal's horsemen. The Carthaginian line collapsed. Rome had learned from its defeats. Hannibal was beaten. After Zama, Hannibal became a statesman in Carthage, reforming its finances and government. But Rome never forgot. They demanded his surrender. Hannibal fled east, offering his genius to foreign kings. Yet Rome's shadow reached everywhere. Hunted, cornered, Hannibal chose death over capture. In 183 BC, he took poison, reportedly declaring, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience to wait for the death of an old man." Hannibal was one of history's greatest tacticians. He crushed Rome's armies on their own soil. He forced the Republic to evolve, to become more disciplined, more resilient, and ultimately more powerful. His campaign across the Alps remains one of the most audacious feats of military history. Though he lost the war, he won eternal fame. To this day, generals from Napoleon to Eisenhower studied Hannibal's maneuvers at Cannae. Rome eventually destroyed Carthage, but Hannibal ensured that the name of Carthage would never be forgotten. Hannibal's genius wasn't just in tactics, but in psychology. He understood how to exploit Rome's pride, lure them into traps, and shatter their confidence. For over 15 years, he was a phantom in Italy, undefeated in battle. And though Rome outlasted him, history remembers the terror of his name: Hannibal at the gates. Attila the Hun, 406 to 453 AD. In the late Roman world, rumors spread of a strange, savage people from the endless steppes of Asia. They came on small, fast horses. They fought with terrifying speed. They had no cities, no walls, just tents, herds, and weapons. These were the Huns. By the early 5th century, they had swept into Europe, displacing Germanic tribes, terrorizing provinces, and changing the balance of power. At their head stood Attila. Attila grew up among warriors. From the time he could walk, he learned to ride, to shoot a bow, to endure hunger and cold. His people valued toughness above all. Every boy was scarred by ritual cuts, taught that pain was nothing. The Huns had no marble temples or scrolls of history. Their memory was carried in song, in scars, in the clash of steel. Attila embodied that world, fierce, cunning, and merciless. In 434 AD, Attila became joint ruler of the Huns with his brother Bleda. Soon after, Bleda died, killed, many suspected, by Attila's own hand. Alone in power, Attila unleashed his ambition. He demanded tribute from the Eastern Roman Empire. When the gold was slow to arrive, his horsemen burned cities across the Balkans. The Romans called him Flagellum Dei, the scourge of God, believing he was punishment for their sins. Attila's armies were unlike anything Rome had faced. Horse archers who could fire volleys at full gallop, hit and run raids that appeared and vanished like smoke. Mobility that outpaced any legion, striking deep behind enemy lines. Roman walls crumbled, cities emptied, and refugees fled before them. The once mighty empire trembled. Attila's greatest campaign came in 451 AD, when he invaded Gaul's modern France. The Huns swept across the land, burning towns, enslaving thousands. Paris itself braced for destruction. But Rome was not yet finished. Under the general Flavius Aetius, Rome forged a desperate alliance with the Visigoths under King Theodoric. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, also called Chalons, the fate of Western Europe was decided. Attila's cavalry crashed into the Roman Visigoth line. The fighting raged for hours, brutal and chaotic. King Theodoric fell, trampled in the melee, but the Romans and Goths held their ground. For the first time, Attila was forced to retreat. Defeat did not stop him. The very next year, Attila turned south, invading Italy itself. Cities burned, Aquileia, Milan, and others. Refugees poured into the lagoons, planting the seeds of what would become Venice. Rome itself seemed doomed. But then something extraordinary happened. At the gates of Italy, Attila met with Pope Leo I. No one knows exactly what was said. Some claimed Attila saw a vision of Saint Peter and Saint Paul beside the Pope. Others say famine and disease already weakened his army. Whatever the reason Attila turned back, Rome was spared. In 453 AD, Attila prepared for yet another campaign. But fate struck first. On the night of his wedding to a new bride, Attila died suddenly, either from a nosebleed, choking, or perhaps assassination. His empire, built on fear and speed, collapsed soon after. Attila's reign lasted barely 2 decades, yet his shadow was immense. He forced both halves of the Roman Empire to pay him tribute. He left entire provinces in ashes. His name became synonymous with destruction. To the Romans, he was a punishment sent by heaven. To his own people, he was a hero who brought them wealth and power. To history, he remains a symbol of the chaos that swept the ancient world. Attila had no great cities, no lasting monuments, no marble statues. But he had something Rome feared most: mobility and unpredictability. He showed the world that empires could be humbled by horsemen from the steppes. And even centuries later, mothers in Europe frightened children with the same words: "If you don't behave, Attila will come." Charlemagne, 742 to 814 AD. When Rome fell in 476 AD, Europe splintered into countless kingdoms, tribes, and warlords. Trade collapsed, cities shrank, and chaos replaced order. Out of this darkness rose one man who would unite much of Western Europe under a single crown. His name was Charles the Great, or Charlemagne. Charlemagne was the son of Pepin the Short, king of the Franks. Upon Pepin's death in 768, the Frankish kingdom was divided between Charlemagne and his brother, Carloman. But fate intervened. Carloman died suddenly in 771, leaving Charlemagne sole ruler of the Franks. From that moment, his destiny was clear: to expand, to conquer, to rule. Charlemagne's reign was defined by near constant warfare. For over 40 years, his armies marched in every direction, fighting more than 50 campaigns. His conquests included the Lombards in Italy, 774. Charlemagne crushed their kingdom, took the Iron Crown of Lombardy, and declared himself king of the Lombards. The Saxons, 707 to 804, a brutal 30-year campaign. Charlemagne fought, converted, and subdued the pagan Saxon tribes of northern Germany. Entire villages were massacred, thousands forced into Christianity at the sword's edge. The Avars, 791–796. In the plains of Central Europe, Charlemagne shattered the nomadic Avars and seized their legendary treasure hoard. Spain, 778. Charlemagne led a campaign across the Pyrenees. Though he suffered a setback at the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass, immortalized in the epic Song of Roland, his push established Frankish influence over northern Spain. Through blood and steel, Charlemagne built an empire stretching across modern France, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, the Netherlands, and northern Italy. On Christmas Day in the year 800, inside St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, something extraordinary happened. As Charlemagne knelt in prayer, Pope Leo XIII placed a golden crown upon his head and proclaimed him Emperor of the Romans. The title had been dead for over 300 years. With this act, Charlemagne revived the very idea of a Western Roman Empire. To his people, he was not just a king, but a Roman emperor reborn. To history, he became Charlemagne the Great. Charlemagne was not only a conqueror, but also a missionary with an army. He believed in one empire, one God, one faith. Wherever his armies marched, monasteries followed. Pagan shrines were destroyed. Saxons and other tribes were baptized by force. This fusion of Christianity with conquest set the foundation for medieval Europe. It also laid the groundwork for future crusades. Charlemagne's greatness did not end with war. He understood that true power required more than conquest. He established capitularies, royal decrees that standardized law and governance. He promoted education, inviting scholars like Alcuin of York to his court. Together, they launched the Carolingian Renaissance, reviving learning, Latin, and the copying of ancient manuscripts. He reformed currency, weights, and measures, bringing stability to trade. He encouraged the construction of cathedrals, palaces, and schools. His palace at Aachen became a symbol of Frankish glory. Despite his empire, Charlemagne lived simply by royal standards. He ate plain food, wore modest clothes, and spent most of his time traveling among his lands, inspecting courts, armies, and churches. He fathered many children and sought to secure alliances through their marriages. Yet he was known to keep them close, insisting his daughters remain at his court, sparking gossip among his nobles. When Charlemagne died in AD 14, his empire stretched wider than any in Western Europe since Rome. He was buried in Aachen, in a simple stone throne that can still be seen today. Though his empire would fragment within a century, his influence never faded. He laid the foundation of France and Germany. He gave legitimacy to the idea of a Holy Roman Empire. He revived learning in a Europe sinking into darkness. He became a symbol of unity, power, and faith. Even centuries later, kings and emperors look back to Charlemagne as the model ruler. Napoleon crowned himself in his image. Hitler claimed his legacy. The European Union even honors him as the father of Europe. Charlemagne conquered through the sword, but ruled through vision. He showed that empire was not just about war, but about law, faith, and culture. Where Attila represented destruction, Charlemagne represented construction. Where others sought glory for themselves, Charlemagne sought to shape an entire civilization. His empire may have splintered, but his idea, a united Europe under one vision, still echoes today. Tamerlane, 1336 to 1405 AD, in the dusty steppe of Central Asia, near modern-day Uzbekistan, a boy was born in 1336. His name was Timur, later known to history as Tamerlane, meaning Timur the Lame. He was of noble lineage, claiming descent from Genghis Khan through marriage ties, though not by blood. As a young man, an arrow wound left him partially crippled in his leg and hand. But if his body was scarred, his ambition was limitless. He vowed to restore the Mongol Empire and surpass it in terror and glory. Timur rose from the chaos of Central Asia after the decline of the Mongols. He began as a bandit chief, then a warlord, and by cunning alliances and ruthless betrayals, he secured control of Samarkand in 1369. From there, he launched a career of conquest that would make him one of the most feared men in history. Timur's empire stretched from India to Anatolia, from the steppes of Russia to the deserts of Persia. Everywhere his armies marched, cities burned, and skulls piled high. Some of his most infamous campaigns, Persia and Mesopotamia, ca. 1380s. Timur devastated Persia, laying waste to cities like Isfahan. After a revolt, he ordered the massacre of 70,000 and built towers of skulls as a warning. The Golden Horde, 1391 and 1395, Timur clashed with the Mongol Khans of the steppe. He crushed them, sacking their capital Sarai, ending their power, and seizing control of Central Asia. India 1398 v. Timur invaded the Delhi Sultanate. His army slaughtered over 100,000 prisoners before the battle even began. Delhi itself was looted and burned, leaving a trail of ash and corpses. Anatolia's 1402, at the Battle of Ankara, Timur captured the mighty Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I. Bayezid was humiliated, kept in an iron cage, and died in captivity. The Ottoman Empire was nearly destroyed. Damascus and Baghdad, ancient centers of learning and culture, were reduced to rubble. Baghdad saw 90,000 dead in a single massacre. Timur called himself the Sword of Islam, but his empire was forged in rivers of Muslim and non-Muslim blood alike. What made Timur unique was not only his brutality, but but how he used fear as a weapon. News of his massacres spread ahead of him. Cities often surrendered without a fight, knowing resistance meant annihilation. Entire empires collapsed under the shadow of his terror. Yet Timur was not only a destroyer. He dreamed of making his capital, Samarkand, the most beautiful city in the world. He brought architects, artisans, and scholars from the cities he conquered. They built grand mosques, palaces, and gardens. Blue, tiled domes rose above the desert, monuments to Timur's glory. He loved Persian culture, supported poets, and commissioned magnificent works of art. Even as he burned empires, he built a cultural jewel in the heart of Asia. In 1405, Timur set his eyes on one last conquest, China. He raised a massive army, intending to destroy the Ming dynasty and finish what Genghis Khan began. But as the campaign began, he fell ill and died in Otrar, aged 68. His soldiers wept. His enemies sighed in relief. The world had escaped his final firestorm. Timur's empire crumbled soon after his death. His sons and grandsons fought for control, and much of his empire dissolved into fragments. But his bloodline endured. His descendant Babur would later found the Mughal Empire in India, one of the most magnificent dynasties in history. Timur left behind a paradoxical legacy, a destroyer of empires who killed millions, leaving entire cities lifeless, a patron of culture who made Samarkand a shining center of art and architecture, a conqueror feared above all others, whose very name became a curse in chronicles. Timur embodied conquest in its rawest form, merciless, strategic, and overwhelming. Where Genghis Khan built a lasting empire, Timur built a kingdom of fear. His reign reminds us that conquest is not always about creation. Sometimes it is about destruction, so vast it reshapes civilizations. Timur died, but his legend never did. To this day, his mausoleum in Samarkand, the Gur-e Amir, stands as a reminder of the man who nearly set the whole world on fire. Suleiman the Magnificent, 1494 to 1566 AD. Born in 1494 in Trabzon on the Black Sea, Suleiman was the son of Selim I, a fierce sultan who doubled the size of the Ottoman Empire. When his father died in 1520, Suleiman, just 26 years old, ascended the throne. Few could have predicted that he would become the longest reigning sultan in Ottoman history, ruling for 46 years. His reign would define not only the empire, but the entire 16th century. When Suleiman became sultan, the Ottoman Empire already stretched across the Middle East, North Africa, and southeastern Europe. But under his rule, it became a superpower spanning 3 continents: Europe, Hungary, the Balkans, and parts of Austria. Asia, the Levant, Mesopotamia, Arabia, and Persia. Africa, Egypt, the Red Sea coast, and North Africa. His empire controlled key trade routes, commanded vast wealth, and stood at the gates of Europe. Suleiman was not content to rule from a throne. He personally led 13 major campaigns, riding at the head of his armies. Some of his greatest military triumphs: Belgrade, 1521, Suleiman captured the fortress, opening the way into Hungary. Rhodes, 1522, after a brutal siege, he expelled the Knights Hospitaller, securing Ottoman control of the eastern Mediterranean. Battle of Mohos, CS, 1526, one of the most devastating defeats in European history. The Hungarian army was annihilated in under 2 hours. Hungary collapsed, becoming a vassal of the empire. Siege of Vienna, 1529. Suleiman's armies marched into the heart of Europe. Though the siege failed due to weather and logistics, it terrified Christendom. The Ottomans were now seen as an existential threat to Europe itself. Middle East, 1530s. Suleiman clashed with the Safavid Persians, capturing Baghdad and cementing Ottoman dominance over Mesopotamia. Naval supremacy. Under his Admiral Barbarossa, the Ottomans ruled the Mediterranean, defeating Christian fleets and striking as far as Spain. Everywhere Suleiman's armies marched, the world shook. But Suleiman was more than a warrior. He was called Kanuni, the lawgiver. He reformed the empire's laws, balancing Islamic Sharia with practical governance. He standardized taxation, curbed corruption, and strengthened justice. His laws endured for centuries, guiding the empire long after his death. Suleiman's court in Istanbul became a beacon of art, architecture, and learning. He patronized poets, scholars, and architects. The architect Mimar Sinan built mosques, palaces, and bridges that still define the skyline of Istanbul. Suleiman himself wrote poetry under the pen name Muhibi. The Ottoman Empire under his reign was not only a military giant, but a cultural superpower. Suleiman's personal life was as legendary as his reign. He broke Ottoman tradition by marrying his concubine Roxolanus. Hurrem Sultan, a former slave of Ukrainian origin. She became his closest confidante, wielding influence in court politics. Their love story changed Ottoman history, ushering in the Sultanate of Women, where imperial wives and mothers played central roles in governance. Despite his triumphs, Suleiman's empire was not invincible. The failed siege of Vienna showed Europe that the Ottomans could be resisted. His wars drained resources, and rebellions simmered in distant provinces. His later years were marked by the execution of his beloved son Mustafa, manipulated by palace intrigue, a decision Suleiman reportedly regretted until his death. In 1566, at the age of 72, Suleiman led one final campaign against Hungary. He died in his tent during the siege of Sigetvor, still on campaign, still a warrior. His death was kept secret until victory was secured to prevent panic in the army. Suleiman left behind an empire at its greatest territorial extent. He had expanded its borders, codified its laws, and elevated its culture. Under his reign, the Ottomans stood as the most powerful state in the world. Europe remembered him with fear. His own people remembered him with reverence. He was Suleiman the Magnificent to the west, and Kanuni, the lawgiver, to the east. Suleiman embodied the perfect balance of warrior and statesman. He was not only a conqueror, but a builder of law, empire, and culture. Where others ruled with terror, Suleiman ruled with both sword and pen. His empire endured for centuries, his laws remembered, his monuments still standing. In the tapestry of history, Suleiman was not just magnificent, he was monumental. Napoleon Bonaparte, 1769 to 1821 AD. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, just a year after it was annexed by France. He was not French by blood, but by fate. Sent to military school in mainland France, he excelled in mathematics, artillery, and strategy. He was ambitious, fiery, and deeply insecure about his Corsican origins. The French Revolution, 1789, gave him his chance. As the monarchy fell and France plunged into chaos, Napoleon climbed the ranks. By the age of 24, he was already a brigadier general. Napoleon's first taste of glory came in Italy. Leading ragged, poorly supplied troops, he transformed them into a disciplined, unstoppable force. He defeated the Austrians in a series of brilliant maneuvers. Lodi, 1796, where he personally led a charge across a bridge, earning the devotion of his men. Arcole and Rivoli, battles where his speed and deception crushed superior forces. Italy was conquered. Napoleon became a hero of France. Next, he turned his eyes east to strike at Britain's trade with India. He invaded Egypt, winning the Battle of the Pyramids 1798. But at sea, the British Admiral Horatio Nelson destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon's Eastern dream collapsed. Still, he returned to France not as a failure, but as a legend. France was in political chaos. The revolution had devoured itself. The Directory, the ruling body, was weak and unpopular. In 1799, Napoleon staged a coup d'état. He became first consul, the most powerful man in France. 5 years later, in 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French in Notre Dame, snatching the crown from the Pope's hands. The message was clear: Napoleon's authority came from no one but himself. Between 1803 and 1815, Napoleon fought the Napoleonic Wars against virtually every power in Europe. His brilliance lay in speed, concentration of force, and deception. He could march his armies faster than his enemies, strike where least expected, and destroy them piecemeal. Some of his greatest victories: Austerlitz, 1805, the Battle of the Three Emperors. Napoleon lured the Austrians and Russians into a trap and annihilated them. His masterpiece, Jane on Auerstedt, 1806. Napoleon crushed Prussia in a single campaign, capturing Berlin. Friedland's 1807, he defeated the Russians, forcing Tsar Alexander I into an uneasy alliance. Wagram's 1809, after initial setbacks, he triumphed against Austria, securing dominance in Central Europe. By 1810, Napoleon controlled or influenced most of Europe. France was the center of an empire stretching from Spain to Poland. Napoleon was more than a general. He was a builder. Napoleonic Code, a civil law system that influenced legal systems worldwide. Education. He established lycées, schools to train future leaders. Administration centralized government, efficient taxation, and meritocracy. Economy modernized infrastructure and banking. For many, Napoleon was not only a conqueror, but a modernizer. But ambition has its limits. Spain, 1808, Napoleon invaded, but the guerrilla war drained his armies. Britain, under the Duke of Wellington, supported the Spanish. It became the Spanish ulcer. Russia's 1812, his greatest mistake. Napoleon marched with over 600,000 men into Russia. The Russians retreated, burning everything. At Borodino, he won a bloody battle, but Moscow was abandoned and set aflame. Winter, hunger, and disease destroyed his army. Fewer than 100,000 returned. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility was shattered. The Sixth Coalition, Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, united. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of Nations, Napoleon suffered his greatest defeat. In 1814, the Allies marched into Paris. Napoleon abdicated and was exiled to the island of Elba. But the story wasn't over. In 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba and returned to France. The people rallied to him. In just days, he regained power without a battle. Europe trembled. The Seventh Coalition mobilized. At Waterloo, 1815, Napoleon faced the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian General Blücher. After a desperate battle, Napoleon was defeated for the final time. Captured by the British, Napoleon was exiled to the remote island of Stane, Helena in the South Atlantic. There, he lived out his final years, dictating his memoirs, shaping his own legend. He died in 1821, at the age of 51. Napoleon's shadow looms over history militarily. He revolutionized warfare. His campaigns are still studied in military academies. Politically, he spread nationalism and the idea of merit-based advancement. Legally, the Napoleonic Code endures across the world. Culturally, he became a symbol of genius, ambition, glory, and hubris. Some see him as a tyrant who cost millions of lives. Others see him as a visionary who reshaped Europe, but none can deny he was one of the greatest conquerors in history. Suleiman the Magnificent, 1494 to 1566 AD. Born in 1494 in Trabzon on the Black Sea coast, Suleiman was the only son of Selim I, the fierce sultan who expanded Ottoman power into the Middle East. In 1520, at the age of 26, Suleiman inherited the throne. The empire he received was already powerful, stretching from the Balkans to Anatolia, from the Black Sea to the Red Sea. But under his hand, it would reach its golden age. Unlike many monarchs of his time, Suleiman led his armies personally. He believed conquest was not just a right, but a sacred duty. The conquest of Belgrade, 1521. His first campaign was against Hungary. The fortress of Belgrade, which had resisted the great Mehmed Tibu, fell to Suleiman's artillery and determination. This opened the gates of Central Europe. The Siege of Rhodes, 1522. Next, Suleiman turned south. The island of Rhodes was held by the Knights Hospitaller, a Christian military order. After a brutal 6-month siege, Rhodes surrendered. Suleiman allowed the knights to leave peacefully, a gesture that enhanced his reputation as both a warrior and a man of honor. In 1526, Suleiman struck at Hungary itself. At Mosies, his disciplined janissaries and heavy cavalry smashed the Hungarian army in less than 2 hours. King Louis Suwa of Hungary drowned while fleeing the battlefield. Hungary was broken. The road to Vienna lay open. In 1529, Suleiman launched his first attempt to capture Vienna, the Habsburg capital. Rain, mud, and fierce resistance forced him to retreat. In 1532, he tried again, but Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire mobilized too strong a defense. Though he never captured Vienna, the very fact that the Ottomans reached its gates terrified Europe. Suleiman's conquests were not limited to Europe. He campaigned in the Middle East against the Safavid Empire of Persia. In 1534, he captured Baghdad, securing Ottoman dominance over Mesopotamia and the holy cities of Islam. The empire now stretched from Hungary to Iraq, from North Africa to the Persian Gulf. Suleiman was not only a land conqueror. Under his reign, the Ottomans became a naval superpower. His admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa dominated the Mediterranean. At Preveza, 1538, the Ottoman fleet destroyed the combined navy of Venice and Spain, securing Ottoman control of the eastern Mediterranean for decades. Ottoman ships sailed as far as the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, challenging Portuguese power. Suleiman was called the Magnificent in Europe, but in the Islamic world, he was remembered as Kanuni, the lawgiver. He reformed laws to balance Sharias, religious law, with canon secular law. He codified taxation, land ownership, and criminal law. Justice became more predictable, less arbitrary. His reforms gave the empire stability, and his subjects, Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike, saw him as a fair ruler. Suleiman was not only a conqueror, but also a patron of the arts. He commissioned mosques, palaces, bridges, and schools, transforming the Ottoman capital. His greatest architect, Mimar Sinan, built the Süleymanî Mosque in Istanbul, a masterpiece of Islamic architecture. Under his rule, literature, calligraphy, textiles, and ceramics flourished. The Ottoman Empire was not only feared on the battlefield, but admired for its culture. Behind the glory of empire lay a human story. Suleiman's great love was Hürrem Sultan, a woman of Ukrainian origin who rose from being a concubine to becoming his legal wife. Her influence at court was immense, sparking both admiration and controversy. But Suleiman was not free from tragedy. His son Mustafa, a popular prince, was executed on his orders due to court intrigues. This cast a dark shadow over his reign. In 1566, at the age of 72, Suleiman led one final campaign against Hungary. At the siege of Sigetfort, he died in his tent, still on campaign, still a warrior to the end. His death was kept secret until the battle was won, so the army would not lose morale. Suleiman left behind an empire at its peak. Its lands stretched across 3 continents. Its armies were the most feared in the world. Its culture was admired from Venice to Persia. He embodied the Ottoman dreams, a ruler who conquered, legislated, and built. Europe remembered him as the Magnificent. The Islamic world remembered him as the lawgiver. History remembers him as both.